Hello and welcome back to the Green Room podcast. I'm your host, Garen Green. And if you're new here, let's get one thing straight from the jump. You won't find any corporate fluff or clinical jargon or textbook maths in this room. This is real, raw, bottom-up talk about survival, recovery, and brutal mechanics of what it actually takes to build a sovereign life from absolute zero. And before we dive in, I want to share a brief word of caution. In the Green Room, we do not shy away from the raw truth. This episode may contain a deep discussion about suicide, substance use, intense personal grief or trauma. And these are lived experiences and real life stories. Sharing them is part of the healing process, but I know they may be difficult to hear. So if you are currently in a place where this content can feel a little bit heavy, do take care of yourself, breathe, pause, and come back later if you need to. You really are not alone. Now, let's begin of episode 9. So in my therapy room this week, a real heavy reoccurring theme kept landing right in front of me in a lot of my sessions over the past few weeks. And I've been sat across multiple people from completely different walks of life, all processing the exact same brand of relational trauma. They have just come through a brutal personal season, a sudden health crisis or financial fracture, or a total loss of stability. And right when the weather got rough, right when the ground started shaking, their friends, partners, or even family members they'd known for years completely vanished. They went dead, silent. They couldn't handle the weight of someone else's darkness. But then the story shifted. My clients did the quite agonising and unglamorous work of surviving. They stopped waiting for a rescue team and they began to rebuild their foundations brick by brick and reclaim their own power. And suddenly, the moment the sun came back out, those exact same people seemed to reappear in people's lives. Sliding into the text messages, sending a random just thinking of you text, acting like nothing ever happened, and brazenly trying to re-access the high vibrational energy of a person who has finally found their footing. And if you're navigating this right now, if you are feeling like the sting of people who have dropped you, or the white hot fury of them trying to wander back in now while you're winning, this episode is your blueprint, and I'm going to deconstruct this dynamic using kind of like a cognitive restructuring of CBT and the fierce distress tolerance of dialectic behavioral therapy and the deep spiritual terrain of Summer Carl Jung's shadow work. And he's kind of one of my gods in therapy. I do love Carl Jung's approach. He was so ahead of his time, and even to this day of over nearly a decade of practicing as a therapist and prior training to that, his theory still blows my mind to this day. And I'm not just going to be speaking to you as a therapist with a textbooks. I'm going to be speaking to you as a man who has been left for dead in the exact wilderness twice in my life. Maybe a few more scenarios in regards to that, definitely through my life from adulthood and, the difficulties I've had when, even as therapists, believe it or not, we can have ups and downs and we have life challenges. And once where it nearly destroyed me with resentment because I was completely unarmed, and once where I used every ounce of clinical and energetic energy I possess to turn the dark into like a training ground. And we're going to talk about what happens when people turn their backs, how to stop wasting your life forcing, wondering why, and why breaking these predictable patterns is the only place you will ever truly grow. So turn up the volume, And here we go. Let's get into it. So, let's strip back the polite illusions we wrap around our relationships. So, when your life shatters, the initial trauma isn't actually the crisis itself. The real trauma is the sudden echoing silence from people you considered anchors. And I want to take you back to 2010. And that was a year I hit my first true catastrophic dark place. I lost a very close friend of mine at the time, and I just shifted from using Class A substances. So I was just breaking away from those foundations and those dynamics of people around me within that time. And I'm not going to lie, the grief over the years and having lots of friends prior to that completely fractured my psychological landscape. My world stopped spinning. And during that entire brutal stretch of isolation, do you know how many of my supposed inner circle reached out? Not one, not one single person. I was completely abandoned in the dark. And I went and seeked therapy myself. I had an attempted suicide of myself, and I lost everything and everyone around me. And I always remember a year later when I started getting therapy, I started volunteering in a local drug and alcohol charity because I felt that was kind of my calling at the time. And a year later, when I had somehow dragged myself out of the ditch and the dust began to settle, I started training to become a therapist as well, volunteering to gain my experience. And it was very interesting that people suddenly started popping back into my life and telling me how difficult life was, the challenges they went through, and that, oh, I'm really sorry I haven't been in touch speech. And, they came around with casual conversations, acting like nothing had happened. And now I managed to scrape my way through. And eventually I found therapy support for myself. Um, But while I was on that journey, that transition of breaking away from people, training to be a therapist, having therapy myself, volunteering in drug and alcohol services, while reflecting and grieving to some aspect to the loss of my friends who passed away, unfortunately, for either suicide or overdoses. So throughout that time, I was possibly grieving to kind of find my purpose as well. And now I managed to kind of gain a way or through and eventually find my support for myself. But for the years after that, I really do remember I carried this massive weight, toxic weight of resentment. I was consumed by bitterness. I kept playing the tape over and over in my head. How could they do that after everything I'd done for them? So I was really resentful that and shocked that people could really treat you like this. And why did that storm leave me bitter for years? Because in 2010, I had no tools. I was scared. I was broken. I was entirely unequipped to process the massive emotional deficit of abandonment. I was reacting entirely from raw, unmedicated trauma and thought my pain gave me a right to their accountability. And that expectation kept me chained to my past. And I want to kind of fast forward to exactly 10 years later, 2020. How interesting that it works for me in a, kind of decade shift. And the universe decided it was time for the ultimate final exam, as I'd call it, and hit me with a category 5 storm. At the time, my marriage collapsed. I faced severe, crushing financial issues. I lost a friend after I walked out of my marriage. I lost a friend of mine who took his own life, who I worked with, a very close colleague because of the pressures of life. And I was desperately holding down 3 separate jobs simultaneously just to keep my head above the water. I was sofa surfing at the time at my mum's, and there was freezing nights, believe it or not, when I was literally sleeping in the back of my car in a lay-by, um, waiting for the next day before I started one of my shifts at work. But hear me clearly. Something was fundamentally different in 2020. By this point, I wasn't just a guy getting knocked around by life. I was a qualified psychotherapeutic counselor with years' experience, thousands of hours working with clients, and, experience in sitting in that chair supporting others. And on top of that, being a Japanese Yasui form Reiki master teacher, with years of experience of self healing and spiritual grounding. I had also clocked years working within the charity and intensive social support sectors with homelessness, addictions, housing support, and holding the line sometimes for people experiencing absolute rock bottom crisis. While I was going through that myself, and I always remember as I sat in my car, it's pitch black outside, watching the exact same relational pattern repeat. Watching people I had fiercely supported in their dark times systematically turning their backs on me and mine. A massive internal transition occurred. So there was me, homeless, in my car, surfing at mum's while holding down 3 jobs. And people around me, close people around me, who could have quite easily put me up for a few nights or at least with their spare rooms, help their friend. But unfortunately, they were too busy and they shut me down. So in 2010, I had no tools and it completely broke me to the dark place of a suicide attempt. And 2020, I was completely armed to the teeth with spiritual and clinical weapons, as I call them. And I realized I had an absolute choice in how I spend my remaining energy, what I had at that time. I could do what I did a decade prior, wasting my limited, precious psychic life for screaming into the world and asking, why would anyone treat me like this? Or I could take my years of experience as a psychotherapeutic counselor, as well as a year experience as a Japanese Yasui Reiki master teacher, and use them to stabilize my own energy field and my own psychological values. So in that time, I always remember it, a frosty morning. I was out probably 4 o'clock in the morning. And I always tell people this story. I remember seeing 2 swans. Sun was rising through the fog, and it was such a grounding experience where I was just observing these swans. It was just, unless you was there, you really can't feel what I was feeling that time, which gave me an element of hope. Mind you, I was sat in a field on my own with nobody supporting me. And I kind of sat with my own thoughts and my own energy while I was doing my self healing. And I chose the tools. I stopped looking outward for validation or rescue. And I leaned directly into the fear, the isolation, and the raw loneliness. I felt every bit of it. But instead of fighting it, I generally asked the universe at that time for the strength to endure it. And I used that dark room to face my shadow and grow. And to understand how you move from the paralyzing sort of bitterness I had in 2010 to the ironclad sovereignty of 2020, we have to look at the cognitive mechanics of what happens to your brain when people abandon you. So, let's look at this through CBT or a cognitive behavioral therapy lens. And CBT teaches us that it's never the external event that causes our emotional suffering. It's the story we tell ourselves about the event. And taking it back to my life journey in 2010, my automatic thought loop was because they left me, I'm disposable. Because I was good to them, they owe me loyalty. And in the clinical terms, that is a massive cognitive distortion called the heavens reward fallacy. It's the subconscious belief that if you are a good person, if you sacrifice, if you're always the helper, the universe or other people will guarantee you fairness in return. Well, I can tell you now, this has been 20 years in the making and trial and error, probably nearly 20, well, 26 years in the making. I can assure you it's a lie. Other people's behavior is never an insurance policy against their own lack of character. And because I lack the clinical awareness and openness I have now in 2010, that really distorted, that distortion fed my bitterness towards the world for years. And I always remember in 2020 sitting on my mum's sofa, and I ran a cognitive restructuring protocol in my own brain, and I sat and reframed the data, so to speak. And I looked at their silence and said, this is not a statement about my worth. This is an objective measurement of their emotional ceiling. And when you shift your thoughts from why did they do this to me to this is exactly who they are when the price of admission gets high, the resentment evaporates. You stop demanding a broken system give you what it doesn't possess. Now, let's layer in more of a DBT or dialectical behavioral therapy, specifically the powerhouse tool of radical acceptance. In 2010, I thought reality. I spent years draining my battery because I refused to accept that people could be self-serving. And resentment is nothing more than pain preserved by stubborn refusal to accept our own reality. And shifting over to 2010 to kind of give you that difference between my approach in 2010 to 2020. In 2020, the end of December, I was sleeping in my car, and I actually practiced radical acceptance as a survival mechanism. A dialectic means two opposite truths coexisting in the same space at the same time. And the dialectic I had to accept was this: I'm currently experiencing absolute terrifying rock bottom, and the people I loved and I thought supported me have completely abandoned me. And I am completely capable of utilizing my professional training and experience and hopefully expertise to rebuild my own life. So I question that if I can turn all these clients around, I'm not saying that my caseload is 100% successful, because, you know, we're therapists. It's got to be the right fit for the right client and vice versa. So, you know, I started using my own expertise to rebuild my own life. And I stepped in directly into what dialectic behavior calls the wise mind, the perfect alignment of your raw, grieving, emotional self and your cold, calculating, rational self. And wise mind told me that wasting a single drop of energy on fair weather connections was an energetic leak that would literally cost me my survival. At that time, in the early hours, sleeping in a lay-by in my car, I decided to close that leak. And let's push past the clinical framework now and enter the deep spiritual terrain where psychology and energy work meet. And this is where Carl Jung's concepts of the shadow and individuation become real world armor. And Jung taught us that the shadow contains everything a person cannot bear to face about themselves: their weakness, their fragility, their unexamined chaos. When you are naturally a resilient person or a healer or a Reiki master teacher. People unconsciously use your stable energy to hide from their own internal darkness. So you are their buffer against reality. But the moment your life fractures and you show raw, bleeding vulnerability, you break the subconscious contract. By being down, you force them to realize that their anchor can break. You hold up a terrifying mirror to their own unexamined shadow. They don't run because they hate you. They run because the lack of psychological grit and ego strength to look into the abyss with you without falling apart themselves. Some people can't mentally stroke with this, but they make out they do. Seriously, you've got to put in the hours and train hard in psychology theories. And I can assure you, any therapist out there will tell you it isn't just a bit of paper being a qualified therapist, and it isn't just about, oh, I'm a great listener. I can assure you, you go to the dark shadows in your training and it teaches you to face your own fears. And I can assure you, you've got to have a hell of a lot of resilience to be able to get to the position of where we are. And I'm not saying I don't fold. I'm not saying I don't wobble. I'm human like any other person, but I do have the right tools, and seeking my own therapy, which I have, and clinical supervisions, which I have, they're here to support me. It's not about people kind of holding their egos up in the air, because we have to work with other people to make sure we're working within safe practice. And I remember looking in 2010 without my tools integrated. That shadow terrified me. I felt completely consumed by my darkness. But in 2010, armed with years of Reiki trial and error and my psychotherapeutic counseling training, and I knew how to channel energy. I knew how to sit in the fire without being reduced to ash. I didn't bypass the pain. I looked directly into my shadow. I sat with the terror of losing my marriage, my financial stability, a loss of a very close friend through suicide. My mum's health wasn't at the best at the time, and a very close friend of mine, Andrew, an old chap who I got become a very close friend, was having countless heart attacks. So there was a lot of things going around me at the time, and I was doing the best I could for my closest people. And at that time, that was my mum and Andrew. There wasn't anybody else, considering what they was going through themselves. I will always remember them two people. I completely miss both of them because they have passed on. And what I'd give to be able to have a conversation in moments like this, oh, I'd kill to be able to have a conversation. They were my closest friends, and I completely doted on my mum. They were the two people which helped me get through my really difficult times, and I'm forever in their debt for this. So wherever you are, Mum and Andrew, massively grateful for that journey we got to spend together. And when I started to sit in the fire about reducing to ash, and I didn't bypass the pain, I looked directly in my shadow at that time, and I sat in the terror of marriage breakdown, financial stability collapsing, my home, sofa surfing, living in my car, and still working, holding down 3 jobs just to kind of keep me afloat. And when the clinical frameworks hit their human limit, I leaned on the universe and I surrendered my ego, and I asked for spiritual strength to break my old patterns of behavior and hopefully grow. And that is the heart of individuation, the spiritual and psychological process of shedding the expectation of the herd to become entirely who you were born to be. And here is the living, breathing evidence that this works. I see this exact same transition manifest in my private work, even in my day job, every single day. And for 10 years within my own private work, I have watched clients walk through my door stuck, firmly in that 2010 version of themselves, similar to myself. They are paralyzed by the predictability of their toxic family systems, drowning in resentment of being abandoned and scared, and constantly questioning why people treat them this way. But when I walk them through the exact bottom up framework, combined in grounding psychological restructuring with deep internal energy awareness, the shift is quite staggering. And I watch clients stop staring at the door, waiting for an apology, which that is never going to come. I watch them take that scattered, desperate energy and pull it back into their own core, face their own shadow, and completely break generational patterns of behavior. They stop being victims of other people's emotional limitations and become a sovereign authors of their own perimeter. The evidence of their growth isn't that their life suddenly becomes easily. That's why they became completely unshakable in the dark. How do we work with this today? How do we take the hard fought lessons from my car in 2020 and apply them to your current crisis so you can build ironclad boundaries? I remember that crucial part in my life, in the shift and transition of my life, when I was sitting in my own shadow during that freezing winter, sleeping in my car and sofa surfing. I couldn't just rely on theory. If you're sitting in your own dark room right now, I want you to write these down. This is some ideas I've kind of helped myself really through trial and error and practice. First of all, I used CBT, thought stopping, and decatastrophizing. So when you are abandoned, your mind spirals into the exhausting loop of why me and I'm going to lose everything. Every time my brain tried to play that old, predictable 2010 tape of resentment, I physically whispered to the world, stop. I managed to force my brain to look at the objective data. I am cold, I am lonely, but I'm still breathing. I'm not disposable. My ego is just in its training ground. Second, I use what we call in dialectic behavioral therapy tip skills for immediate distress tolerance. When the panic hit at 2 o'clock in the morning, and TIP stands for temperature, intense exercise, pace breathing, and paired muscle relaxation. When the emotional wave felt like it was going to break me, I changed my physical temperature. I would step out into the freezing night air to shock my nervous system out of my fight or flight response. And then I would immediately practice my breathing because my anxiety would peak. Inhaling deep for 4 seconds, which we do, holding and flexing a slower exhale for 6 seconds. It dropped my body out of survival panic and it brought me straight back into focus of the wise mind. And third, I learned massively heavily through my Reiki training from a level 1 through to my master teacher level of the Japanese form of Reiki healing. And amazing lady, Helen, who had a crystal shop. I remember walking in there on my first day and she gave me such guidance, and her Reiki shares was amazing. She was definitely not an ego type spiritual woman. She was very blunt and open. And I really count my blessings to Helen to teach me in the way that she did. So if you're listening, Helen, I really want to say thank you to you. And I learned heavily of grounding and centering through my Reiki healing. And when I hit my level 1, all I wanted to do was heal everybody else. And I completely forgot those crucial steps of healing oneself. So I started grounding and centering myself. And when your life has collapsed, your energy is completely scattered outward, bleeding into the void. And I would sit out in nature and place my hands over my heart center and my solar plexus and consciously draw my energy back into my own core. And I'd visualize anchoring my roots deep into the earth, sealing my perimeter so that no more of my vital life force could leak out to people who didn't care if I survived. I sat in the darkness, but I became the generator of my own light. And you must be able to accept the reality of the pattern when you use these tools to do the heavy lifting and rebuild your life. Those fair weather people will try to return, and it's completely predictable, and they will slide back in asking, how did you survive all of that, or sorry I haven't been in touch, life stuff's been going on, etc., etc. And they still make the same patterns of behavior round and round again, clearly not ready to face their own shadows. But I have literally detached myself from many people over my years, and I am out on this journey solo, but I have met some amazing people through my podcast, through my counseling practice, and through various types of social media. I've met some really inspiring, authentic and compassionate people out there. So I want to thank you to you guys as well. And recognizing how did you survive all of that question for what it actually is. And it's an attempt at compulsive consumption. And they don't want to do the terrifying internal work to forge their own spiritual fire. So they return to base the warmth of the one you built alone out in the freezing cold. And breaking that pattern means you stop explaining your life to people who refuse to witness your struggle. You stop oversharing and you tend to close the gate. The emptiness you feel when the wrong people leave isn't isolation. It's an ironclad protective perimeter. It's sacred, cleared space required for your own individuation, as Carl Jung spoke of. You have managed to chop that wood alone in the dark. Do not let people who fled the storm walk all over your holy ground with muddy feet. Lock the gate, protect your core battery, and recognize that your growth belongs exclusively to you. And as I sit here today, looking back at the long road from 2010, and there's plenty gone on before then, I can assure you, 2020, I want to make one thing absolutely clear is I carry zero resentment towards my past. In fact, I want to thank them. By turning their backs, they unwittingly handed me the ultimate gift. They forced me to move in my own shadow and discover what I was actually made of. I sincerely hope that they find their own way and heal their own wounds. But my past is no longer allowed in my present. The door is locked and the focus is entirely forward. I didn't record this episode just to tell you my story. I recorded it because if I can help that one person listening to this right now, someone who's sitting where I sat, feeling terrified, worn down, and completely buried by their own heavy thoughts, I want you to know that you can grow if you set your mind to it. Your current situation is not your final destination. But I also know how hard it is to reach out for help. When you are the rock, the provider, the healer, or the one everyone else seeks out for support, admitting you're drowning feels impossible. But hear me clearly. Even the strong ones need a little guidance and support now and then. True strength isn't pretending that you're unbreakable. It's knowing when to let your guard down. The sooner you let your guard down to the right grounded support, the more surprised you will be by the sheer amount of internal growth you gain. You don't have to carry the world on your shoulders alone. You just have to be willing to face your shadow head on. And bring your awareness entirely back to your body right now and take a deep, intentional breath. And if you are currently sofa surfing, if your relationship's just collapsed, if you are looking at an empty bank account or an entirely empty room, hear me clearly. Many would break under this weight, but you possess innate capacity to change your temperature, pace your breathing, ground your energy, face your shadow and grow. And I'm living proof of that. And the clients I work with every day are living proof of this also. The patterns are broken. The perimeter is set. And before I close, I want to express my sincere gratitude to everyone who has been part of this journey. I thank you for the lessons you have shared, the trust you have placed in me, and the growth we have experienced together. Every conversation, challenge, and breakthrough has been a reminder of the strength and resilience that people carry within them. And as you continue forward, I wish you ongoing growth, self-discovery, and confidence in your ability to navigate life's challenges. May you carry the lessons you've learned with courage, embrace new opportunities with hope, and continue becoming the person you aspire to be. And thank you for allowing me to be part of your journey. And I wish you happiness, success, well-being, and all the very best for the future. And if you're listening to this and you're ready to stop wasting your vital life force, wondering why people turn their backs on you, and you are ready to use deep, grounded, integrative therapy to rebuild your life from absolute zero, let's get to work. No textbook fluff, no corporate jargon, just real bottom-up strategy. And feel free to head over to my website, GarenGreenTherapies.com, to secure a private, full-rate one-on-one session. And remember who stayed in the room when it was dark. Protect your life. And until next time, get out of the trenches and step into your sovereignty. Peace. This is Garen Green signing out from the Green Room. Look after yourselves and put your needs first.